Is it true that it's gone a bit woke? I mean, we see stories about the RAF sort of promoting non-white pilots and having to pay compensation to people. We've seen adverts which are kind of more like department store adverts than they are anything else. How woke is the army and the navy and the military now?
Well, the only person that can really answer that is Grant Shapps himself. He's been very vocal in being concerned about some of the reporting, some of the policy directions, some of the pursuits of these woke agendas, and reminding the nation and indeed parliamentarians as well of the primary function of our armed forces, and that's to defend our nation and to defend our interests. And that could occasionally require us to utilize violence in some form. It's the authorized use of lethality. Nothing, friendly about that. It is warfare is horrible in every sense of the word, and you need to have people, professionals that are trained to utilize warfare in the way that we need to protect our interests. We cannot have a woke agenda affecting our ability to fight. And that is something that Grant has made very, very clear. He needs to identify and indeed flush out. And I commend him for absolutely doing that.
And where is this woke agenda coming from? Because we see it in civil service, we see it, Home Office emails, we see whistleblowers that say this is what happens behind the scenes in some of the government departments. But I mean, in something like the Defence Department, is it coming from there? Is it coming from the civil service? Is it coming from the sort of top brass in the army? Where's it coming from?
Well, the honest answer is I don't know. When I was a defense minister, I made sure that it was the ministers that decided the overall strategic direction of travel. We gave clarity as to where we needed to go. And I'm sure Grant Shapps will stamp his own authority on where our armed forces need to go. You touched on it yourself. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. We're going to have to increase our defense posture. We're going to have to expand our armed forces. I know that's something else the defense secretary wants to do. Budgets are tight. I hope we'll have some good news in the Chancellor's statement in March on this very, very front. We are stepping forward on the international stage, more so than we've done in the last sort of 5 or 10 years. Very important that we do so, particularly with the United States perhaps becoming more isolationist if Donald Trump gets elected. All important aspects of making sure that we have an armed force capable of defending our interests as we enter a very dangerous era of insecurity.
Well, exactly right. And it would seem to me that being in the military is a sort of antithesis of being woke, isn't it? Because, obviously you operate under a certain set of rules, and there are things that you don't do. There's a Geneva Convention and all of that, and you don't, mistreat prisoners and all of the things that you don't do. But what you don't do is ask people how they're feeling or whether they're a bit anxious that you might be pointing a gun at them. You just wouldn't want anybody asking those kind of ridiculous questions. And you need to be able to hire people who can actually kill people.
Yeah, there is a sort of a sense of determination, grit, tenacity, a sense of vigor that we expect from all our armed forces. We should recognize that society is changing fast, arguably sometimes too fast. We don't get an opportunity for perhaps the collective to settle in understanding a new idea comes into society. It gets pushed out in social media and across the agendas. We almost have to accept it before we've had time to understand what that is. Now, clearly, the armed forces need to adapt to a changing society. And an example of that is now every single role in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy is now open to males and female. Doesn't matter. And that's actually a good thing. But some of these other elements that you touch on are absolutely not in the interest of making sure that we have a resilient, determined, professional armed force able to, as I say, utilize lethality in the way that might be required if we ever had to go to war.
And the other thing that's been raised is that there are some, restrictions being lifted perhaps on people coming from other countries to fight in our armed services. And they're sort of making it easier for them to do so and giving them access to some high-powered jobs and certainly some national security-related areas, And obviously I think that would be a mistake, and I think Grant Shapps thinks that's a mistake as well.
100%. One of the vigors of our system is to make sure that those who are signed up and take the king's shilling, so to speak, are absolutely committed to fight for king and country. And what we cannot do is reduce the vetting procedures, the scrutiny in which we check the backgrounds of any individuals seeking to sign up for our armed forces. And this idea that somehow we want to allow Commonwealth countries greater access by reducing those numbers. I should make it very clear that my sergeant was from New Zealand, was a fantastic soldier, absolutely brilliant, but he was vetted correctly, and he was then therefore allowed to join. I'm afraid this goes back to the personnel numbers. The challenge that Grant Shapps now faces is to make sure that we recruit and indeed retain the size of armed force that we need. I've been arguing for a number of years now to see an increase in defense spending, because ultimately, if you don't spend more money on our defense, then we're not going to have the security that we need, given, as I say, the very changing threat picture that we face. And ultimately, that penny is starting to drop. What we saw in the Red Sea is a great example of how our economy and our security are actually symbiotically intertwined. Right. If you don't invest in security, how can you send our Royal Navy there to defend our economy in the Red Sea? Those ships that are coming through have to divert around Africa, and that has an impact on inflation, on the cost of living here in the UK as the cost of goods goes up. Yeah.